So this video is going to be talking about how preservation plays, what is going to separate, in my opinion, the average preservation evoker from the best preservation evokers. And I'm going to try and cover as many little kind of mechanical things as possible so that when people pick up the class for the first time next week, they know as many of the kind of nuanced ins and outs of the spec as possible. I've said it before in previous videos, but to paint with very broad strokes here, preservation effectively does kind of, I guess, 3 or 4 things. One of those things, the first thing is going to be its cooldowns, its big cooldowns. So things like time dilation and rewind and cauterizing flame or emerald communion. I'm not going to go into all of these yet. I'm just painting the picture of the, I guess you would say, the different pillars of preservation gameplay. So you have the cooldowns, the large, long cooldowns. Outside of those cooldowns, you press your empowered spells, which are going to be Fire Breath, Dream Breath, and Spirit Bloom. The third pillar is going to be the abilities that spend your essence, which is Disintegrate, which does damage, and your 2 healing options, Echo and Emerald Blossom. Now, outside of those kind of 3 very broad stroke pillars, you're spamming a filler spell or using very short-term cooldowns. I think that everyone is going to play preservation pretty much the same way when it comes to cooldowns. All preservation evokers are going to have a pretty good idea of when they should be pressing rewind, of when they should be using time dilation, their external cooldown, and things like using cauterizing flame for the dispel or emerald communion if they choose to talent into it. For the most part, people get a hang of these kind of buttons, when to press them and which damage patterns they fit into well. I would say the only real outliers here are going to be Tip the Scales, which is your 2-minute cooldown that causes your next empowered spell to cast instantly at its maximum level of empowerment, and Stasis. The best players are going to know when to hold them, when to fold them, and when to use them for damage, so to speak. Obviously, Stasis is only helpful abilities, healing spells. Tip the Scales can be used for damage. As for the second pillar, the empowered spell usage, I think a lot of these also are going to be quite, I guess you could say, scripted or kind of set in place. Pretty much everyone is going to know when to use these abilities. And this is Fire Breath, which will be almost always used on cooldown just for damage, or in some niche cases it'll be used to store up living flames, 4 living flames that they can cleave onto targets with the Leaping Flame talent over here. The other 2 empowered spells are going to be Dream Breath and Spirit Bloom. The Dream Breath will be used as an AoE heal whenever AoE healing is necessary and it's off cooldown, so long as enough targets are stacked. So long as your group positioning and your personal positioning makes pressing this button viable, then Dream Breath will be your go-to big AoE heal. Verdant Embrace will always be used before it when maximum throughput is required to utilize the Call of Ysera talent. And then Spirit Bloom will be used when the group or your personal positioning doesn't allow for Dream Breath, or when you only need to heal 1 or 2 targets at a lower level of empowerment. So again, pretty much everyone fairly quickly is going to get a good idea of when to use these, and there won't be a great deal of difference between the varying levels of player skill as to how these buttons get used. I think the real skill expression for preservation will revolve around essence spending. So I guess what I said earlier as the third pillar of preservation gameplay. Skill expression for preservation is going to be knowing when to spend your essence, when to save it, and what to spend it on. It can be used to deal damage with Disintegrate, and if you wish, you can talent into making it restore a small amount of mana with Energy Loop. The other options is to use your essence to heal, which can be done with either Emerald Blossom, which costs 3 essence, or Echo, which costs 2. Both of these abilities are now instant, but both of these options are highly refined or improved with talents on the tree, which could pigeonhole some of your decision making if you only take, say, if you only take Echo talents, well then you're probably not going to be pressing Emerald Blossom very often, and vice versa. Emerald Blossom is fairly straightforward. It doesn't have many real mechanical interactions to play around. You kind of just press Emerald Blossom to heal people. But Echo is about as powerful as your decision making and planning can be. Echo is, at least at the moment, Echo is the real playmaker and decision making machine of preservation. Now, if you talent for it, with Time Lord. Echo will be instant cast, cost 2 essence, and will replicate 105% of healing of whatever spell you press that isn't Echo onto targets that have Echo on them. Now, Echo lasts, I believe, 18 seconds? 14 seconds? I think it's 18 with Timeless Magic ranks. But anyway, what you can replicate. You can replicate most of the abilities themselves. So Reversion, Deep Breath, Spirit Bloom, Verdant Embrace, Living Flame, all of those kind of things. Most of the talent options you have that add healing options to other things can't be replicated. So things like Panacea that add a 250% spell power heal to Emerald Blossom doesn't get replicated. Any healing done through Lifegiver's Flame doesn't get replicated. Emerald Communion doesn't get replicated. Things like that. Temporal Anomaly Absorb healing also does not get replicated, but most everything else does. Now, the one spell I mentioned there that I haven't talked about earlier is Reversion. Like I said, when you're not doing the kind of 3 pillars, when you're not using cooldowns, you're not spending essence, and you're not using empowered abilities, you're going to be using your kind of filler spells, your very short-term cooldown spells, which is either going to be Living Flame to deal damage or to heal, Azure Strike to deal cleave damage, Reversion, which has a cooldown reduced by haste of 9 seconds, or things like Temporal Anomaly if you spec into it, which has I think a 6-second cooldown reduced by haste. The other thing I wanted to touch on quickly before I get into the kind of tips and tricks and mechanical intricacies of Preservation is to talk about Mastery. I haven't seen anybody else mention this. I didn't read it anywhere either, so maybe this just isn't very common knowledge at the moment. I've been testing this myself every couple of weeks to make sure it still works the way I'm about to say it does. And as of today, so like a couple of days before Phase 2 of pre-patch goes live and everyone can start playing Preservation, the way Mastery works at the moment is its tooltip is actually quite similar to Verdant Embrace in that the tooltip reads that it is a mechanic that affects allies, but it actually also affects you. So healing done to allies is increased by whatever percentage of your mastery, while their health percentage is lower than your own. Now that is exactly how Mastery works, but what it doesn't say in the tooltip is that any healing you do to yourself gains the full effect of Mastery regardless of what your health is. You always have the Mastery full bonus active whenever you're healing yourself. Now this is, in my opinion, a pretty huge part of the Mastery mechanic itself, because it also means that in situations where you and your group all get hit by roughly the same amount of damage and you all have roughly the same amount of gear and you all drop to roughly the same amount of health, your Mastery will heal you more than anybody else until you have more health than them, and then your Mastery will heal everybody for the full effect of whatever your Mastery percentage is extra healing. So it's almost like Mastery mechanically makes itself work. As for the kind of mechanical nuance of Preservation, so if you talent into Lifegiver's Flame, Fire Breath heals a nearby injured ally for 80% of the damage done to up to 5 targets. This is a deceptively strong talent. Prior to the Fire Breath rework, that's actually one thing I didn't mention, is the empowered spells all have different ranks. There isn't a great deal of decision making when it comes to this. As far as Fire Breath and Dream Breath go, they do the same damage and the same healing regardless of the empowered rank you use them at. The only difference is that the low empowerment level casts do more damage or healing over time with a smaller upfront hit, and the higher empowered casts do the opposite. So they do a large upfront hit with a low pot or dot. But prior to the rework of Fire Breath, the Lifegiver's Flame talent only worked on the initial hit of Fire Breath. And now it actually works on the initial hit and the dot portion. So if you apply a long dot with a, let's say, rank 1 empowerment Fire Breath that does damage over 20 seconds or 24 seconds if talented, that will mean that that dot ticking on up to 5 targets will heal players in your group for 80% of the damage done. Echo will copy or replicate the upfront hit of Dream Breath as well as applying the hot. So if I apply Echo to someone and then channel a Dream Breath hot, even if the Dream Breath doesn't hit them, Echo will replicate the initial heal, but also apply the Dream Breath hot. If you talent into Golden Hour, which causes reversion when applied to instantly heal the target for 15% of the damage taken in the last 5 seconds, this also applies to any reversions applied with Echo. So if you echo your whole party and reversion someone, you can effectively instantly undo 15% of the damage your party has taken over the last 5 seconds. Exceptionally strong. Reversion can also be applied twice to the same target. One replicated version of Reversion from Echo and one normal version from the cast. So if I apply Echo to myself and then press Reversion, I'll get 2 reversions on myself. They both do healing. Unfortunately, you don't get 2 stacks of temporal compression, you only get 1. And that works this way for all echoed heals. So it would be nice, but if you applied Echo to a few targets and then replicated a bronze spell to them all, you don't get an individual stack of time compression for each replicated heal, unfortunately. Probably be a little bit too strong. What is also probably a little bit too strong, though, is another interaction with Reversion and Echo. So, like I said, if you echo someone and then cast Reversion, you get 2 instances of Reversion on that target. The interesting thing here is that both of these Reversion applications apply Golden Hour, which is the 15% of damage taken in the last 5 seconds is healed back instantly. So I can show it here just with full damage. So I echo myself and then Reversion, and I get 2 Golden Hour instances or procs. What this also means is that if you have spec'd into Grace Period to increase healing by 10% on targets with your Reversion, if you have 2 Reversions on one target, this stacks twice. You effectively increase your healing on that or those targets by 20%. This also means that one of the main kind of weaknesses I've heard people say is that the single target healing or spot healing of Preservation has been quite weak. And I think even I said this back a couple of weeks ago before I knew these interactions existed. And I think this interaction, if it doesn't get fixed, is incredibly strong for tank healing, spot healing, what have you. Any kind of high burst healing required on even 1 or 2 targets. This interaction is insane. You gain 1 essence every 5 seconds by default, and Reversion has a 9-second recharge by default. Both of these numbers are reduced by haste, but this means if you do nothing else, you can every, say, 10 seconds, you can effectively undo 30% of the damage a target has taken in the last 5 seconds and apply about 400% spell power hot to targets that also increases the healing they take by 20%. That's incredibly strong. This copying hots onto targets with Echo also actually works for Dream Breath. So I can echo an ally and then press Dream Breath. And if I hit them with the Dream Breath, they will get 2 stacks of Dream Breath. As far as the skill expression goes for Echo, there are quite a few options with what spells you want to replicate with Echo. The real decision making is going to come down to which cooldowns do you want to use with Echo, or do you want to use no cooldowns with Echo so you can then use those cooldowns if they're needed. So a lot of people will use Echo and then combine it with things like Spirit Bloom or Dream Breath or Verdant Embrace. Verdant Embrace is 260-ish% spell power heal, which is quite high for a spot heal. If you can replicate that to multiple targets very often, it's very strong. The cool interaction with Verdant Embrace is with Lifebind. So again, if you echo multiple targets, let's say that I echo 3 people and then I use Verdant Embrace on myself, even though the tooltip doesn't say this, it is usable on yourself. I will heal those 3 people with my Verdant Embrace and myself, and then 40% of the healing that is replicated via Echo gets copied back to me. So this means in a Mythic Plus environment, you will be able to echo 3 people if you talent into the extra essence to get 6 maximum. You'll be able to echo 3 people, fly to the 4th person with Verdant Embrace, which effectively heals 4 people, and then have 40% of all of that healing replicated back to you through Lifebind. So this means that with no kind of extra preparation or banking essence or anything like that, you can effectively heal 5 people for, I think it's something like 1300% spell power with really nothing other than 1 cooldown and some essence. But like I said, some people will be spreading out their echoes and then trying to combo those echoes with a strong ability. And in some situations, this probably will be the right move, but it's so much healing that I imagine this will very often just lead to large amounts of overhealing. Something like getting 3 or even 4 echoes out on targets and then hitting those same targets with Dream Breath would be overkill healing. I'm not saying it won't be useful in some situations, but for the most part, a lot of those combinations just won't be necessary. So instead, Echo being used with Reversion or Verdant Embrace or Living Flame will probably be the way to go. But again, knowing which combinations to use with Echo is going to be a large part of what separates the average and the exceptional Preservation Evokers, at least in my opinion. Unfortunately, the Call of Ysera buff, so your next Living Flame is increased by 100% after using Dream Breath, doesn't work with the stacked Living Flame or cleaved Living Flame from Leaping Flames. It will effectively buff one of the 4 or one of the 5 Living Flames, not all 5. Now, I'm not sure at the moment which playstyle will be strictly better than the other, or even if that will be the case. At the moment, the Echo style, what a lot of people call the bronze build, has a lot of depth and intricacy, and it feels very fun to play, and it is quite powerful. But that also being said, the Emerald Blossom, kind of, I guess you would say, green build also has some nuance to itself. Things like Panacea. This is the sort of talent that, if played around with a very mastery heavy build, could set something like Emerald Blossom apart in some situations, or a green build apart in some situations. In that, part of the spell selection decision making you're going to have to make is knowing when to prioritize your self-healing to activate your mastery when healing and increasing the healing on other players. Like I said, mastery already kind of has this functionality somewhat baked into it. There will also be room to just play around this yourself and make decisions that increase your health faster than your allies' health so that your mastery gets maximum benefit or value. As for some general advice for people who will be picking up this spec for the first time next week, I would say focus on everything other than your essence spending to begin with. Get comfortable with your empowered abilities, with the positioning requirements. Get comfortable with your filler spells and reversion and even temporal anomaly, which is a lot of fun to use. Get comfortable with your cooldowns and your kind of emergency buttons and your personal defensives and things like that before you really start kind of drilling down into how you can use Echo in the most optimal ways for each situation. The essence spending on preservation is really, it's going to take time, and the meta around this will evolve, I'm assuming, quite a lot, especially once more people have a better understanding of all the ways in which essence spenders and Echo and things like that all work with one another. One last kind of painting with very broad strokes here comment I'd like to make is that preservation is really the only healer in WoW at the moment that has real options between a proactive style and a reactive style of healing. Being able to proactively prepare for incoming damage patterns that you know with Echo, and even the temporal anomaly talent that applies Echo at 30% of its effectiveness, which is increased by the Time Lord increased Echo healing talents. Even something like this in a raid environment, being able to spread echoes like mini echoes to a lot of targets and prepare ahead of time for damage that will be coming out. It's really fun to see that kind of style be available while also being able to just change your build around and really not have to worry about all of those things and focus more on the reactive side of healing with Emerald Blossom. I think that sort of optionality, build around the playstyle you'd like choice is really good. And I wanted to kind of highlight it and give Blizzard a little shout out for what I consider to be a job well done on that front. I, for one, am really looking forward to playing Evokers on live next week, and I hope this video has helped some people who are planning on doing the same. So thanks for watching, and algorithm stuff.